Commissioner 40.
Good evening. This is the May 11th, 2022 meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission. Welcome, everybody. My pleasure, before we start the agenda, to introduce Cole Mize, our newest member. Cole comes to us from Board of Adjustments, I believe, prior to this. So you're going from the fire into the pan, I guess, or the opposite, perhaps. So anyway, welcome. We're pleased that you could join us.
We're a lot more calmer than adjustment.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's good to hear.
On occasion. So with that, we will start the agenda. And first item is approval of the April 13th meeting minutes. Do we have any additions, corrections, deletions? Okay. Anybody like to move to approve?
I'll move.
So Dennis moves and Rich second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed and abstentions. Okay. This is our public comment period, and seeing nobody in the audience, we will move past that. I guess it's always nice to see folks come in and join us and get to talk with us. So if anybody's watching, we would welcome you to come on down and chat with us. Next item, election of officers. As you recall, Mike Nelson was our second vice chair. Dennis, our first vice chair, or vice chair, not first, just vice chair, or vice chair. Anyway, we need to fill that position. So I certainly would entertain any interest in somebody. Now, just to let you know, it isn't just a ceremonial position, because hi Drew, even within the last year, our second vice chair had to run a public hearing. So it does, it's an important position to fill. So anyway, I certainly would entertain anybody's interest or a nomination for somebody, and don't everybody shout at once. So it would be particularly, certainly Rich and Drew, either of you certainly would be a good candidate.
I like Rich. He's a strapling
What do you think, Rich?
citizen of our community.
I'd be willing to do that.
Okay, so I guess in a formal way, I would nominate Rich Beebe to be our second vice chair. And Mike, help me with the protocol here. Do we just do a vote to approve?
Correct. Yep.
I'll
Just
second.
be a roll call.
Okay, so we have my nomination, Nell's second. So all in favor of appointing Rich Beebe as second vice chair? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed and abstentions. Congratulations, Rich. Thank you. This is great. I'm really pleased that that you're willing to step up,
But I didn't run
or
over.
that you got lassoed into. So next item, approval of reason statement of relevant criteria and standards. This is from our public hearing at the last meeting. Do we have any corrections, additions, any comments? Okay, so would somebody like to move to approve as presented the RCS? Okay, Victoria's motion, Rich second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed and abstentions. Okay. Mike, you're up.
Thank you.
Next item, storage facilities and residential zones.
So I believe I included in your packet a kind of a draft, not really an ordinance, but what would be the language to be included in an ordinance if we were to pass one. This is really just intended to be a kind of a starting point, just a baseline, and start the discussion, kind of go from there as far as any potential development standards, as well as the allowed uses within the specific zones. And so this would be the start of it. This is just a snapshot of our use table within the self-storage, or actually the storage services category, self-storage facilities. Be looking at adding those as permitted uses within R3, R4, residential office and neighborhood business. The superscript there, which is number 1, just points you to the specific use standards within the code. So it's just right after the use table. We have various specific use standards, drive-through facilities, ADUs, home occupations. There's a number, telecommunications facilities. There's a number of those. And really, this would just be woven into that section, which would come after the use table section. So that's what we had previously discussed. Certainly, we could look at adding or subtracting some of the permitted uses in those zones as well. And this would be the section that would talk about self-storage facilities. There's typically an applicability and purpose section at the very beginning. So kind of a statement of really purpose of those self-storage facilities. So going to have some draft language stating the following standards are intended to ensure that the design and operation of self-storage facilities that are located in certain zoning districts are compatible with the surrounding area and minimize their impacts on adjacent uses. I think originally we were planning on just, since these are kind of interwoven into the more residential zoning districts, we weren't going to apply the standards to, say, motor business or industrial. But certainly, if the commission wanted to entertain that as well, we could look at carrying the standards over to those zoning districts also. And then development standards, self-storage facilities shall comply with the following design standards and requirements. So the first one we had talked about, kind of minimum property size. So a minimum size that you're eligible to develop a self-storage facility in residential zone. So minimum parcel size would be 1 acre. I really just chose that, no real rhyme or reason, but he thought it was maybe intended to be a little bit larger of a property than the typical that you'd see in residential areas. And I've kind of got an example of some of the properties that are currently developed with self-storage facilities. So the one on Rodeo, this is an outdated photo, but I have a plan here in a second. We've talked about this one before. This one's 2.13 acres in size.
Question.
And that gives you an idea of the development.
So the one that's on Asbury Almond, that's really small. That's probably not an acre, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I've actually got this one, that one on the
okay.
list as well. So we'll get to that one in a second. So yeah, a little over 2 acres in size. The ones on Mountain View and White Avenue, there's a smaller one that's about a 1/4 acre in size. And then the newer one that's developed in the southeast corner is close to 1 acre in size there. And that's the one right by Grop. So Grops is just to the north there. Got First Street here to the south, Almond. This is the property where Blooms are currently constructing the condominium buildings. And this is the smokestack building here on the southwest corner, St. John to the north there. So there's just a couple buildings that are tucked in between Grop's development and a couple houses here. I believe this may be like a duplex or a triplex on that corner. I believe this is a single family dwelling, but really just intermingled between multifamily and single family, 2-family dwellings in this area, but 0.18 acres in size. So a little under a 1/4 of an acre. And it certainly, wouldn't meet any of the design standards that we're looking at as part of the self-storage facilities. These are the ones on Palouse River Drive and Highway 95 South. The one to the northwest there is almost an acre. I guess 3/4 of an acre, 0.78. And then you got the one to the southwest is a little over 1/2 of an acre. So just to give you a little perspective, certainly can increase or decrease that depending upon how you feel.
Yeah. Why, I don't understand what you're doing here. What do you mean the minimum should be 1 acre? Everything you showed us is less than 1 acre.
Except for the first one.
What am I missing?
It's pretty much just saying, so I just threw the acre out there, but typically, like there was a comment Scott made at the last meeting was that, we don't want to see self-storage facilities just to show up on a typical lot within a residential subdivision. Maybe it's a 7,000, 10,000 square foot lot. He thought that there should be a minimum development size that you could develop the self-storage facilities at. And maybe that's 1/2 acre, acre.
Well, but I thought at least I have no intention of suggesting that these go in R1 and R2. So I don't know if we put them in R4, it's a different thing. I'm just a little confused about, I mean, these less than an acre things are examples. Most of them I wouldn't want to have in an R1 or an R2 zone.
Yeah, and certainly some of the other jurisdictions we looked at,
I
I
wouldn't
mean,
want
they,
a 1 acre one in an R either.
Yeah,
For sure.
What's my problem?
well, I
Well, we're not talking about 1 and 2, I don't think. I
Yeah.
think they're mostly 4 and
Talking 3 and 4.
Three and
R3,
four, yeah.
R4. Yeah. R3, R4, RO, and neighborhood business.
With the landscaping design requirements, which virtually none of the, except for the one that's on the 2.13 acres, almost none of these would meet any kind of landscaping requirements. And I wonder, is there a particular size that's going to be the right economies of scale within also, basically, we want these to blend in. So there's going to be some landscaping requirements. So I guess I'm wondering about whether or not say a quarter an acre or a half an acre would allow for the kind of landscaping that we really would like to see in these residential areas, as well as providing enough units to make it economically feasible.
yeah, I think it's gonna be challenging to fit with the landscaping requirements, setback requirements. If we choose to implement those, I think it's gonna be tough to have any development fit on anything less than maybe a half acre. I mean, you
So
look at
your
the one.
your starting point's an acre, but I think we're going to be dropping that down probably.
Yeah, certainly can drop it down. I just thought I mean, looking at some of the other jurisdictions, they were all maybe 2-3 acres were the minimum
Yeah, I'm more
development
concerned
size.
that they get too big.
So, yeah, I think that was just a concern. R4, it's 5,000 square feet. Is that a concern that if they meet the landscaping setback requirements, if there's a storage unit building that has 10 storage units on it on a 5,000 square foot property in the middle of R4? Or is it something that we want at a larger scale to be able to have adequate room, landscaping, setbacks, things like that? So that's, we certainly don't have to have a minimum lot size, but that was just one of the comments from last meeting, was that it,
Well, with
maybe it
landscaping, we
shouldn't.
may need one. I'm concerned about maximum. And also, R4 is not just apartments. I'm in R4. There are a lot of houses. So I think there's a tendency to think R4 is just apartments. It's not. It is-
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of 5,000 square foot lots. I mean, even smaller than 5,000, but 5,000 is our minimum for R4. But yeah, a lot of the residential neighborhoods, even Fort Russell has some R4 in it.
Yeah.
A lot of those lots are maybe non-conforming, less than 5,000 square feet. So,
Yeah, so I don't want to think too big.
so that's just the concern is, are we wanting to limit these to a certain parcel size so that they may or may not. So somebody buys a lot in Fort Russell, tears the house down and is able to meet the design standards and puts, a building that has 5-6 storage units in it.
The gallery will be
so-
full if you do it in Fort Russell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not the highest and best use, so I doubt that it ever happened, but yeah, just kind of something to think about, but
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that an acre is a minimum, maybe a little on the high side. We may want to, I don't know, that's going to require some thinking.
well, I mean, you look at, the one on Rodeo out of these examples is the only one that satisfies that acre. These are a little bit less. I mean, the one here in the southeast, that's a newer development, the same developer as the one on Rodeo. And, that's about an acre in size, but the rest of them.
Yeah, but we're going to want landscaping and those don't have it.
Sure.
So we have to figure that
What
out.
is the landscape buffer on like that one, or?
They have a
We're on
type.
the 91, right? There's landscape on the 91 acres.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a landscape buffer here on the
Right
east
there.
up against the residential. So that's like a type A buffer. They don't have any landscape buffers on the other corners. This is motor business, I believe, to the south. So it's zone to zone, the like to like. So there's no landscape buffer requirement there. Just to the east, adjacent to the residential.
What kind-
There is landscaping.
Where
There's
is it?
plants and stuff in there.
Okay, because it looks like dirt.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
This is right. Yeah, this is when it was just first developed.
Oh.
But this is kind of a steeper hillside.
Okay.
But yeah, it's trees and shrubs all along that
This is a little
hillside.
misleading when all I can see is dirt.
Yeah.
But the other one has a landscape buffer as well on Rodeo.
It does.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one, same deal, has a, I believe, a type A or type B on that east side. So this is north, this direction. So that's up against those duplexes, and they've pretty much the entire length. But if you look at the other sides, I mean, this is all motor business adjacent to it as well, and there's no
Well, the thing that makes
landscape
this
buffer there.
one less odious is that Moscow Building is a big building. So in a way, it's just part of the neighborhood in that sense. It's just a spit away. So we see, I'm always in shock when I take this behind the street, drive behind Moscow Building and realize just how big. When you come in the front door of Moscow Building, you don't think about it. It seems like a store. And then when you drive down there, it's pretty, it's a serious.
Well, yeah, I
shock.
mean, it backs up onto
Yeah,
Jefferson
that's
Street
right,
there.
right.
So
So it seems to me that one of the reasons that we've never complained about this particular storage unit is it's kind of in the neighborhood, so to speak, of something large. And what did we say? It's a little over 2 acres, isn't it?
yeah, 2.13. So yeah, just something to think about as far as the minimum property size. And we certainly don't have to make a decision, but just wanted to kind of throw that out there as a starting point. Certainly can go up or down, or not even have a minimum at all. Property setbacks, typically it really just ranges from zone to zone. Usually a big, conservative setback, I believe, is about 20 feet. That's typical for R1, R2 zones. It gets a little bit less once you go into R3, R4, but thought 20 feet, 20-foot separation from the street and side streets would be adequate, as well as rear and side shall be 10 feet. So typically side is going to be 5-foot minimum, and then the other side's 10. So both sides have to equal 15. In this case, I mean, if there's landscape requirements for the buffers, they're going to be 10 feet anyway. So that's really going to dictate the setback. So certainly could increase that on the side, but just thought we'd start with a baseline of 10 feet on the side, and then 20 feet in the front and the street side if it's on a corner lot. And then just a note saying those setback requirements supersede the corresponding requirements within the zoning districts which they're located in. I think a lot of the examples that we've seen have setbacks, of course, with the landscape buffers, but then they go right up to the property line on those other sides because motor business doesn't have a setback requirement. And then building orientation. So we talked a little bit about this last time. Just having the access doors of the individual storage units face the interior of the site. This shall not apply to storage units that are accessed, spelling there, accessed within an enclosed structure. So the idea here is to not have those travel lanes on the outside. So prevent a lot of maybe the nuisance activity of people accessing the storage units if they're facing the interior, don't have a lot of the noise and activity that way. And then you end up getting the backside of the building. Better neighbor for residential just because, you don't have the activity and the noise level that you would if there was a travel lane and car headlights and things like that adjacent to the outer property lines. So we thought we'd carry that one over. Building height. Talked about this last time as well. Height of self-storage buildings shall be limited to 10 feet at the eaves. A lot of these residential zones have larger building heights, so they're going to be typically 35 feet, if not more, maybe 40 feet in R4, even higher than that in some of the commercial zones. And so thinking about, some of the other jurisdictions limit those to 10 feet in height up to the eave, and that's pretty much suits a lot of the storage unit buildings that we see built around here. There's not many that are larger than that, except for the storage spot on 3rd Street by Gormley Park. And so,
Aren't those 2-story?
yeah, one of the buildings is 2 stories. Those are, I think, climate controlled on the inside of that building. So yeah, it's the question, keep it a smaller height, less imposing on a neighborhood. It's not likely that we'd get probably 2-story storage unit buildings here. I mean, I don't know, there's a market for them. But certainly, that could be an impact if there's a 2-story building, and looking down on other residential developments, certainly could have some concern there.
My only thought is like, everybody's RV anymore. Like if they want to store their height, they're restricted to 13.6 for height. So I would like to see it like at 14 feet or something, just to see,
Okay.
like, I mean, I don't know. The
I
outdoor,
think,
the
I
outdoor
think 10's
storage.
a little low.
A little low.
Well, and outdoor storage, I'm not sure that's something we want to encourage either. Like, and that's where everybody's RVs are at the moment, or parked on city streets, which I don't love that either. So,
Okay.
that's
Yeah, I was thinking that, it could be more of a modern design with a shed roof, that maybe one of the walls is higher than the other, and certainly could
that would
use
accommodate that,
the additional height there. So, okay,
like 1 story, I think is a good idea, but just maybe
sure.
taller.
Okay.
Mike, in our current layout, is there a difference between storage units that store vehicles or other like recreational like RVs or whatever they may be, compared to just storage units where you'd throw a couple totes in and your bicycles? Do we have a difference? Is it distinguished differently?
I don't believe it is.
Just self-storage, isn't it? Housing's the next one. I think.
What's that?
I think warehousing is like the next
Yeah.
step above.
So the definition would be establishments primarily engaged in renting or leasing space for self-storage. These establishments provide secure space, an example, rooms, compartments, lockers, containers, or outdoor space where clients can store and retrieve their goods. So it really just covers
About
pretty much everything.
everything.
Yeah, it doesn't draw a distinction about what you're keeping on the inside of the building.
Okay.
Hours of access, hours should be limited to 7 a.m. through 10 p.m. for access to the site. Landscaping, type A landscape buffer shall be installed and maintained around the perimeter of the entire site. And this is our common landscape buffer between residential and commercial. We do have more intense landscape buffers. So I believe that all the recent developments for self-storage facilities that were required to provide landscape buffers, they're required to do the type A buffer. So within type A, every 100 lineal feet, there's 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs. Type B, for instance, increases that. So that increases to 4 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 8 shrubs as part of that. And they're all a little bit wider than 10 feet, but has a kind of a footnote there, says they can be reduced to 10 where irrigation is provided. So almost everybody just reduces it to 10 and provides some type of drip irrigation for those landscape buffers. So kind of gives you an idea. I think that's probably going to be a future topic. These are kind of outdated imagery. I think that'd probably be something worth updating in our code, maybe a future code amendment, go to more of a gallon size for the shrubs and caliper size. Just like we had updated our parking lot standards with the landscaping, I think that this section could use some updating and some clearer imagery. So just kind of a side note there, but
Yeah, I was on the street parking. Good idea to get that.
yeah. Yeah, everything, gallon size for the shrubs is typically the way they sell those these days, instead of just height upon planting or height upon maturity. So interior access, vehicular travel aisle. So this is mainly just stating in our parking lot standards, we have travel aisle width, but this isn't technically a parking lot. So I think it'd be good to specify the minimum for just the travel aisles that go in between the buildings, stating that vehicular travel aisles that are used for internal circulation within a self-storage facility development shall not be less than 20 feet in width and shall meet the paving standards of, and that's just referencing our parking lot standards, and just depends on whether it's pavement, asphalt, or concrete there. Typically, depending upon the size of the development, so fire code is going to dictate that. The minimum is 20 almost all the time. If there's a certain length, then sometimes it jumps up to 26 feet in width. So a lot of times this is kind of the baseline is 20, and then that will increase if fire department requires it. Outdoor storage, I intended for this to be a baseline as well. I know we had kind of mixed feelings about RV and boat storage located at these facilities. So I just took a kind of a shot at no outdoor storage shall be permitted with the exception of RV and boat storage. RV and boat storage must be located at the interior of the site and not visible from any adjacent streets or properties. So, trying to hide it a little bit, but maybe still allow some RV and boat storage just because of the convenience of having that, located close to residential areas. I think there's probably a need for that, but then again, with this code amendment, maybe it shouldn't, we shouldn't have that. Maybe it should just be enclosed buildings, but I just wanted to throw that out there to see, as a starting point.
So how do you feel about that? I'd like to hear your opinion. I mean, I don't know, where do people store their boats now? I don't have a boat, sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I'm not big on the RV and
Yeah,
boat storage because you only get in it once a year, and I think it could be on the highway somewhere.
It's
I'm not a
one,
big,
it's,
right
it's-
up front, I'm not a big
yeah,
fan
it's
of it.
one thing to have a storage unit that you go to maybe monthly even to do one thing or another, but typically the RVs and the boats are things that you get it out. At least we see some RV. Let's see, over on, what is it, over by Rosauers is a little RV parking.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. I guess what zone is that?
Motor business.
Huh?
Yeah, that'd be motor business.
Yeah, motor
Yeah.
business, right. So I think that's where it should be.
I'm not real enthused about having the RVs in the residential areas, but in a way, depending on what we make on a decision of the size, it's going to be somewhat self-limiting. If we were to say that it has to be interior and not visible, that those RVs take up a lot of
Big wall,
room,
yeah.
and so if they're going to cater to having RVs, it's going to be kind of self-limiting in a way. The other thing is that if you say RVs but interior, you're going to run into some fire code issues, I think. So I don't know. I have to say I'm not real.
RVs themselves are more than 10 feet. We were talking about a little 10-foot
Yeah.
boom. I don't know how tall is your RV.
I
You
don't have an
must have
RV.
one.
I don't.
12?
I think they are they're 12,
They're
13
12,
feet tall.
yeah,
I
they're
think most of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm envisioning like what you're saying is basically like storage units around the perimeter, right? And I mean all the way around. And then you have like access points. Then you go in and then they're all kind of hidden in the middle in lanes or something. I mean, that's what I'm envisioning. And I see that it would be, it would have to be a larger site, right, to be able to make that feasible, I think. And
Yeah.
to make them completely hidden
We have
that's going to be a
few-
trick all by itself.
Big wall.
Somebody at the end, we could probably ask how that logistically would work.
So Drew, what are you seeing in some of the designs that you've been working on with respect to the RV?
Yeah, so I refuse not to work on them for work. But I guess my opinion on it is like, yeah, I'm sure there's a need for that. There seems like, and I agree, like they're not the best, like being parked outside of in our neighborhoods, right? I don't know with the setting that we're talking about in like an R3, R4. I'm not necessarily a fan of that. I think maybe finding other areas like previously has been mentioned on. Now I know there's some spots on the highway. I just don't like seeing them in general. I know like that's a battle that's never going to be won. Not that I say I'm opposed to them, but just seeing them's not like really a great thing in my opinion, being parked. But I think in this application of an R3, R4, even if they are hidden, in my mind, I think just sticking to storage is suitable for the application that we're talking in. But I'd be curious to look at a map, and I have one in the office, but I guess I need to look at it more often. Where that could potentially lead to, like other locations, and what's the need or what's the data driving the demand, right, for that before we say, well, we need it in R3 and an R4 zone. I'm kind of
Apparently, we don't have any, you can park your RV in your yard, apparently.
Yeah, and I think that may be one of the positives with that. It was to
And
get
So
potentially
I
get some of
know
the
one
RVs.
that's
Yeah.
within a mile of my house, and I don't. It seems strange, I must admit. If you have enough space for a big old RV, it's quite an imposition. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of the properties you go to like Rolling Hills neighborhood, east of Mountain View, you see a lot of that because
there's-
there was
there's a lot
a
of
point in
them.
time where there was a rolled, we had a rolled curb standard, not the vertical curb. So, I mean, essentially you just have a large curb cut in the front of your property. And if you put gravel in the tree lawn, then you can roll up over that, even though it's not intended to do that. And then right beside your house, typically you have a 10-foot setback on one side, and it's perfect for parking an RV or a boat. So it's pretty prevalent. Yeah. I mean, if you go east of Mountain View and to some of the newer, subdivisions east of that, you typically see a lot of RVs and boats parked on people's properties. But yeah,
I'll
certainly.
just go take a drive and go see what I see. To be honest with you, I don't recall too many. So I'll quibble with that, with your comment.
Yeah.
I love to take a drive on the east side of Mountain View, so I'll go do.
And
I'll
honestly,
bring a
even-
report.
Even without the curb that you're talking about, in my neighborhood, I did the same thing. Just backed over the sidewalk and because I
Sure.
had the same 10-foot and
Yeah.
Well,
used to park it right there.
my neighborhood, I've got 3 on the alley within sight. They're in the backyards.
And who knows whether or not that would help with that, if we
I don't
provided
think
a,
they're gonna go
provided
there.
a
I don't think
facility.
they're gonna use
Yeah.
this. They're
Yeah.
gonna stay in their backyard.
Yeah, if they have a spot already, I don't think they'll
Yeah.
move it.
They'll
Yeah.
just,
Pay
there's no
someone else
reason to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I suppose, there's that in-between thing. You have a pickup, and then while they're not as popular these days, the pickup
campers.
recreational gizmo, and you've been parking your pickup there all these years, and you get one of these units, and boom. So it's a little smaller than what we're kind of talking about, but I'm sure there are plenty of those around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the space would be better used for regular storage type thing, and more people would get use out of that than filling it up with a big old RV. That's only one RV that's going to be accommodated.
My thought is I don't like seeing them on the street, so I guess that's.
I don't like seeing them in the backyards, but that's where they
I
are.
know. It's just one of those things. Like I feel like there's such a, yeah, it's hard to. I mean, you see them the whole way to Pullman, right? Like that's where everybody's RVs are at the moment, I guess. So
Yeah, Wheatland.
Yeah.
yeah, like tons of them out that way.
And we do have such, Pullman even has more, but as you have hilly places, it's a little tricky for parking then, isn't it? I don't, just being able to get an RV level is
Yeah, I've always just heard that
challenge.
it's tough to find RV storage without having to drive. You know, it's Wheatland or the Taj Mahal place on Pullman. I think Kirk Hardin out on Mix Road actually is probably the closest around here that he just developed that within the last year or so. And that's pretty much all outdoor storage. I mean, that's kind of hidden by the dairy over there. But I think that he's pretty much at capacity or probably close to it.
Yeah.
You know, so there's certainly a need, especially with the pandemic the last 2 years. Seems like everybody went out and bought outdoor stuff. I've noticed an increase in the outdoors. You
Yeah,
know.
I think it has. They've
So-
been a nice, it's been a perhaps a real positive ability to get out on the road and be safe. Yeah.
Well, if we do it like it's written, where it's located interior and not visible, that kind of takes care of the unsightly part of it. And I still come back to the fact that I think that it's going to be self-limiting, because in the R3 and R4 zones, you're not going to find enough space to build storage units and have hidden RV storage. So it's kind of, to me, it's self-limiting, but
Yeah, I suspect you're right.
I could live with having it as long as it was out of sight in those zones, I guess, is kind of what.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I think if we're thinking out of sight, then I think a 10-foot wall wouldn't cover a 13-foot RV for
Yeah.
the interior.
Yeah.
So I think is there a way in the language, Mike, to write if someone was wanting to develop that, then at that point they'd have to raise the exterior walls to meet that?
Yeah, we could. Yeah, certainly we could add that in there. I mean, typically fences in the city are limited to 6 feet in height, unless it's like a school or other
Right.
public facility. So we probably have to think about whether or not we wanted those larger fences,
Or I guess, sorry, not like a fence, but like the walls of the
the buildings maybe.
the building
yeah,
to
I mean, we could
match.
certainly. Yeah,
Like, if you are going to have interior, then it goes up to 13
yeah,
feet. And then as you're talking about, I think something like feasible is if the low end of the shed roof is pointed to the outside, then it tilts up to the larger side. I think that would accomplish that pretty. If you went 10 to 14 feet.
yeah.
Does not visible just take care of that though? Like not visible from even if you look above the roof, is that not how you would read that? Or?
But yeah, I mean, we certainly could do either.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what do you
It
mean?
says not visible from any adjacent street or anything. So if you're build something that's just 10 foot tall with a 112 slope and you have something 15 feet on the other side, that's visible, isn't it? I mean, that's my thought. Is that
Right. But I mean,
Almost has to be covered.
I mean, I work with a lot. I mean, this isn't a drawback on developers. My dad's a developer, I know, or developer. They're sneaky, right? I work with them all the time. They'll find any way to twist being raised by a developer. They'll find any loophole possible to get around that. And so,
Yeah, I mean, it can
That's
be
what I worry
subjective or up for interpretation. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we certainly could, if that's going to be the case, then yeah, maybe the walls for the buildings that provide the visibility, the non-visible aspect of it need to be 14 feet or so. Yeah, I guess take a shot at that.
Okay.
Certainly.
sounds good?
Mike, I did have another comment. I know this is always invigorating discussion for all of us here with lots of opinion. my only worry, and it's not even a worry, it's, of course, it's like based on my opinion, but you showed the image of White and Mountain View, I believe, right there. I think for me, like as we look at like just the city landscape in general, the urban fabric, having it on like key like arterial roads, like especially on corners. I mean, I know the one that's done there right now is fine, but if you look across the street, that one's been there probably for 30 years, and that doesn't look good, right? I mean, I'm sure it's performing very well now, but from a city perspective, I think, and then we go back to Rodeo, right? I think that one's pulled back. Eventually it'll be developed. You only see it for a little bit. Is there a way to, main like corridors or corners of streets where we can limit that? That's one thought I've had. So
My thought on that one, kind of, if you don't mind, like if we allowed this more in some of these off the beaten path areas, right? So like motor business is like one of the only places it's allowed right now, which those are the places where motor business is those main corridors and those main spots. So I think by doing this, that'll actually help that situation, because that land's really like, doesn't really make sense, right? On one corner, there's Les Schwab, and then there's storage units on the other two corners. I mean, that one used to be a gas station like forever ago. That was Go Farther Gas. Like I think that's almost a better spot for those things and not for storage units. But there was such a demand for storage units, it made sense to put those in those spots that it really didn't make sense. So I think this would actually help that situation.
yeah, and I agree with you 100%. I think it's going to help solve a couple problems like the demand, but my worry is someone finds a great deal on a piece of property on a prime corner.
Yeah.
Bam, we have one of these, and then we're stuck for 50 years, and that's gonna, it's gonna beat us all to the grave, right? And so, that's what I worry about is, and you're right. I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm worried about the one case that it's going to happen. If at least if it's not somehow it's written where it can be approved upon. You know what I mean? Like there's some type of language to protect, I think, these important corners in Moscow. And I know that's like a hard thing to write. I'm not saying it's an easy task, but that's just my thought. So
Maybe having something in place to make them aesthetically pleasing.
yeah, I just don't think they're ever going to look good. But
And it's just subjective.
Well, and Mike, you had indicated that where it's permitted already and what motor business, and it was on the table up there, we could change the ordinance to include landscaping requirements for those permitted uses.
Yeah, I mean, we
as well,
certainly
right?
could carry the, footnote over to require those for motor business and industrial. I mean, we have very little industrial. I mean, it's really, we've tried to transition the industrial to the south end of town, out of the city core. Like St. John's is I think a portion is the only industrial we have that's not even really developed as industrial, because MZ recently, reconstructed a building there. So it's really just motor business, and I mean, motor business, like Rich said, is just located along all the primary highway corridors. It's 95 and Highway 8. So, I guess we'd have to define what those prominent corners are on some type of map, I think, to be able to.
yeah, I just didn't know if we have like if the city has defined. I mean, I know larger jurisdictions do this, but if like there's other arterials that are defined like corridors for like future development, to kind of, it's not forward thinking, but just to kind of say like, hey, like eventually in 20 years, this is probably going to be something. I didn't know if there's something that was already in place that defines those corridors.
Only the comp plan. I mean,
Okay.
the comp plan would dictate what we saw as future land uses for those areas. We have highway beautification plans that we haven't realized. Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of an old council goal from 5-7 years ago, that we haven't kind of moved forward on, but we have plans for the beautification of those areas, and they're mainly by the city entrances, on all four corners where the highway comes into the city limits. But other than that, really, it's just the comp plan that kind of dictates where that future growth is going to go and what types of uses we're going to see in those areas. But
Right.
certainly don't have, the kind of the key corridors or, entryway plan in place for that right now.
Yeah, okay.
Architectural standards. So I have the first one. So I think that probably what we all agreed on last time, use of reflective, bright or metallic colors on buildings or structures associated with self-storage facility development is prohibited. I didn't add any more below this, but I figured this would be a starting point. And if, we saw a few examples from other jurisdictions that required, buildings that were viewed from the street, visible from the street, to be of a higher quality building material than the rest of the buildings within the self-storage facility development. If there were a certain length, there's articulation setbacks, things like that for the buildings that's required. And so I just thought we'd have a conversation of whether or not you wanted to maybe pursue any of those.
What about advertising lights, signs? Lights.
The signs are going to be dictated in our sign
Sign code.
code, and they're already pretty restrictive for commercial uses within or institutional uses within residential zones. So they're fairly limited right now. They're required to be externally lit. There's no internal illumination, things like that.
Have we had any, I'm going to say trailer, but manufactured home, have we had any new requests for any manufactured home in recent years?
No new manufactured home properties. but
One
they're-
wonders, I just over on Palouse River Drive, that person that owned that came in, we did some discussion at one time. You do wonder if that kind of a development offers a chance for a place for a row of 15 or 20 RVs. And I think that gentleman that came in, he even talked about RV parking at the time.
Well,
A
he
couple of
talked
years
about
ago.
it. People came in for the games and parked their
Yeah,
RVs there for the
right.
games. It wasn't
But
storage.
it wasn't
for them.
storage,
for
right?
the-
Yeah, it wasn't storage, but it was, a lot of the tiny homes that are on wheels and chassis
Right.
are declared RVs. And so we had that code amendment a few years ago that amended the manufactured home section as well as the RV park codes to allow more of the tiny homes. So whether ones that are pre-manufactured that aren't on wheels and a chassis, those are modular buildings. So we inserted those in our code as well as allowed tiny homes that are on wheels and a chassis. And so if you go through, it's Gary Lester, it's Abiel Mobile Home Park, and he actually purchased, I believe, Palouse Hills, the one to the very far to the west. If you go take a drive, or actually Street View is updated imagery on Google. If you go through those parks, you'll notice that probably a third of the spaces are now tiny homes or RVs.
Mm.
So it's been really popular. I think the majority of the manufactured home parks have have gained approval through P&Z for RVs to be allowed in their park. We'll actually have one beginning of June, I believe. There'll be another manufactured home park that's requesting more RV approval for their park. So
Some of my mind just wandered to that situation where you wonder if well, I don't know if it makes economic sense or not. I haven't paid attention to tiny homes. I didn't know if they'd kind of flourished and drifted away, or are they still? Are we still dreaming about.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the cost of everything these days, I think they're still
You'd
fairly,
think
fairly
you might,
attractive to
yeah.
people. Yeah. I mean,
You're gonna
the-
have some tiny home spaces over in there.
yeah, I mean, certainly the inquiries haven't stopped. And if you look at those parks, I mean, you'll notice that, yeah, there's a lot of RVs that are permanent residents in there right now. So I think it's serving a need that was there.
That was the intent.
Yeah.
Not storage, but
So-
living in there.
I'm thinking that we ought to go a little deeper on the architectural standards than just prohibited reflective, bright or metallic colors. But I'm not sure I would know quite where to go. But I'd like to see at least some higher standard in the zones that we're talking about.
So like visible from the street
Yeah.
type thing. Give you some we can talk through some examples next time
Okay.
about maybe what that would be.
Well, we talk about being compatible, but we don't say what compatible is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we probably should.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I could certainly bring some examples next
Okay.
time.
Super.
I
Thank you.
think the storage unit on a rodeo is a good example for a community with what looks good right now, right?
Yeah.
One quick question I have, and going back to the landscaping buffer.
Yeah.
You said that around the perimeter of the entire site. Does that include the street side? Is
Yeah.
what you're thinking? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to do something as well. Like none of the
I mean,
rest of them.
even the newer ones we have developed here, they don't have the landscape buffer in the
Buffers
front
in the front,
yard.
so-
So
I think that'll do quite a bit all by itself.
I agree.
In my opinion, I mean, having landscaping on that full front side. I mean, just
perimeter.
applying it in my mind to just like rodeo, like he's talking about. I mean, that would instantly have a bunch of landscaping on that whole edge, not just the weed strip or
Yeah.
landscape strip or whatever we call those things.
Yep.
and then lighting. So all outdoor lighting should be full cutoff per that section of the code. So that's our outdoor lighting code. I actually reviewed that, and in residential zones, you get a little bit of an exemption from the full cutoff requirement. So I think it's important to just state that all outdoor lighting should be full cutoff. And then our freestanding light shall not exceed 12 feet in height. A lot of these developments, you don't really see freestanding lights. They're usually on the buildings themselves. But these are kind of examples of our code right now as far as a pole height. So looking at maybe, R3 is 15 feet, but if you jump up to R4, RO, or neighborhood business, it's 20 feet in the air. I don't know if we necessarily want a 20-foot tall pole with a full cutoff light. So I think it's probably important to specify a lower height if they're going to do a pole. And I think there was another example of 12 feet was the specified height. I mean, we can certainly go up or down with that, but
It kind of makes sense to follow the eve height to a point, doesn't it? Just
Sure,
so if-
sure. Yeah. So if we're going to increase that to, 14, then we could increase that to 14.
That makes sense to me, just so everything kind of ties together.
And then the last one, proximity to residential zones. So I think Joel had brought this up last time. There's quite a few that restricted self-storage facilities within a certain distance of some residential zones. So I had pretty much drafted this. No property boundary of any self-storage facility shall be located within 600 feet of any property within the suburban residential R1 or R2 zones. Really, again, just as a kind of a starting point to have a discussion about whether or not that needs to be in there, or if we're that concerned about these properties located, in that close proximity to those zones. But 600 feet, typical block length is 660, so it'd be about a block away. Seemed like that maybe made sense to me.
Start arguing about block lengths.
Yeah.
Don't make.
Don't go European on
He's
us,
got a
Nels.
present. He's got a
Don't go
presentation.
European on us, Nels.
Fine.
He's got a presentation on this.
Don't say Barcelona. Just the 600 feet I think's like adequate.
Yeah.
I think for it, I think we're already with all the other kind of requirements that we're requiring. I think it's already going to be hard to do in some areas. I think if we made it more than 600, even if we made it 660, it's going to be even more difficult. It is, and I think this is like, I want to go lower than that, but I think this is like from my perspective, I think it's appropriate.
Okay.
I second the lower part, but
I don't even know why I don't even know why we have that. I wouldn't even put it in there.
I automatically apply it to like new development. Like, so I automatically start thinking, well, rolling hills, the Palouse. I start thinking like R1, more like on some of the taller like ridges or whatever you want to say. And then I think of this as like the streets down below. So I could see where it might really make sense and it might still be closer, but it's topography that separates it. So sometimes I feel like the 600 feet might be way too far for something that makes sense, but I don't know. That's just my instant thought.
Well, you bring up a point that I didn't know if it was relevant or not, but talking about hills, if you got a nice house up here and it's looking down the slope to a storage unit, it's not going to have a very good view.
We also don't have like, we're not in like Beverly Hills where we have really steep and you're like, it's a little, I mean, to me, it's a little bit different. We do a lot of things where, you know, you have roads up above with cul-de-sacs or something, and you can't really see what's right below you either. And
I think our main deal is right on Third. The 3rd Street extension is probably the biggest view.
Yeah, we really, I mean,
And we experience that when we talk about 3rd Street. 69 people are in the crowd because they're up on they're looking down on it and saying, I don't like what I see. They
don't like seeing houses with roofs. I mean, houses with roofs. How are they going to feel about seeing a storage unit with RVs in the center of it? Yeah, they don't like it at all. And
we don't have
blame
much
them.
of that territory.
don't really like,
Yeah, I mean the one that I could think of is hasn't been developed yet at the end of Baker Street, Peterson. I think it's 40 acres there. You know, has Baker Street that, I mean, there's all apartments on either side and then it dead ends, but Baker will eventually continue in that same kind of northeast fashion. And then there's R3 and R4 adjacent to Baker because that's the flatter area. It's up against Baker, which is a collector, I believe. And then it transitions into more surrounding R2 development, I believe, on the outskirts of that. So that, I mean, that'd be kind of one of those examples. If you have the R2 up against R3 or R4, I mean, you could already have the possibility of apartment buildings down there that you'd be looking out onto anyway. So, you know, you have properties, the city shop. I mean, you have that subdivision that looks right down on the city shop. Of course, city shop was there prior to that subdivision.
Of course, there's a 6-year-old who lived right up above there. His favorite spot in the whole world. My nephew was like, I love this city shop.
So yeah, I
We
mean,
should bring him in and let him write an ordinance or two for us.
Yeah, I mean, so it may prohibit some opportunities that may be a good thing. But yeah, Joel brought it up last time as a potential insertion, and then there was certainly some other codes that had something like that in there. So thought I'd maybe insert it just to have a talking point.
Yeah, I don't have any particular thought one way that I would defer to anybody else that has specific thoughts about it.
Well, it's an interesting thing about views from hills too. If things are planted, significant planting, all of a sudden there is no view. I presume that when my house was built, you could sit here in downtown and look up there and see it up on the hill. But as Moscow has become a tree city, it really changes the the nature of what you can see, and you sense that, especially with your place over along the Arboretum. Everything's planted so heavily you can barely see
Yeah,
200 feet.
I've
and-
ruined my view.
Yeah, there is. So when we start talking about views, it gets tricky depending on how the landscaping is developed. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that one. I maybe just leave it in for now and we'll continue to discuss it.
And then I think that pretty much wraps it up. But, in some of the other ordinances, we saw that there's fencing requirements. So I think that naturally you're going to have a fence around the majority of the self-storage facilities that get constructed. I don't think there's any doubt that fences will get constructed. And so I guess there's a question of whether or not there's any specific design of fence that we want to dictate as part of the design standards. I left it out for now, but that's, I guess, just something to think about. Some required, probably a pretty extravagant expense of like a masonry wall. I think a lot of our development's wrought iron. I think Cody that develops the one on Rodeo and White Avenue, I think those are wrought iron fences that look pretty good. So maybe just something to think about, but I don't know if we necessarily need to include it as part of the design standards just because they're almost always going to, be fenced. So.
And I think I want to see a fence. I'm not saying fancy, because they'll do what they need to do, but I wouldn't like one to decide not to do a fence, especially in a neighborhood, because then you've got the kids and everybody going. They'll probably have one, but it's not going to be onerous if we put it in there because they'll have it anyway. But if one of them doesn't, then we'll have a problem.
I think that's true. And I think what you're saying too, Mike, is I think most good facilities have fences because that's how you control like when people can access the facility.
Yeah.
That's the only way. But I think having a design standard, throwing up a used chain link fence, that's like, we might not see it for 10 years, but we'll probably see it in 15 years, right? If we don't put something in there, it'll be that one that'll come and bite us later down the road. And if I'm going to be running a facility like this, I'm going to want a fence just for that kind of reason of keeps people out and and then for the neighborhood, it keeps the tenants of it out at certain times. So I think, if we go back to, White and Mountain View, the one on the newly constructed one has a fence, which I think is fine.
Yeah.
The one across the street, it's about as close as you can get. I mean, I think it's like right up.
Probably right on the property line.
Yeah, right on the property line. And then we have a weed barrier in between it. And so I think like the fence right there would probably, they can't do it now, but that's why I think it's someone that might, again, find the loopholes will come in and I think scoop that up pretty quick. And then we're stuck with it for 40 years.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not asking for a wall. Some kind of decent fence.
So do you want to bring this back either at the next or the one after that, whenever you're ready to move us forward with
I can
this?
do that.
Just keep making progress. So
Yep.
Can we
Great.
get some sketches or drawings or something to help visualize this better?
Yeah, I can see if I can pull that off. Yeah.
super. Thanks, Mike. We'll just keep working the issue until we all get comfortable with it. So next item was Joel's. He's in Boston, if I recall. So no transportation. I would like to mention one thing, and we can kind of talk about this perhaps at the next meeting. There was an article in the paper last week that talked about ordinances and density and affordable housing. I wouldn't mind having that as a group discussion not tonight, but Jennifer, would it be possible to get a copy of that article and just email it out to everybody? It was in the Daily News last week at some point, and just so that we could kind of have a common frame of reference, and then we'll just put it on the agenda for discussion. It might be a 3-minute discussion, or maybe it'll be something a little bit more, but maybe see if we could. Are you familiar with the article that we're
It's this one, right?
Victoria has. They did. Gina was involved. I think Cody was involved, and there was a discussion on. I guess it was UI students. Okay. Anyway, I wouldn't mind having a little group discussion about that. So, but it would help if we all had the article that we could kind of have a common frame of reference. So, okay. Next meeting is scheduled for the 25th. Is that going to trip up over anybody's Memorial Day weekend plans, do you think? Or are we good to go for the 25th?
We certainly, I mean, we'll have the public hearing at the next meeting in June. And so maybe we just cancel that meeting and then just shoot for the June meeting.
Okay. Is that satisfactory with everybody? So we'll go ahead and,
Never complain about it.
yeah, I rarely get any objections when we talk about canceling. So that next meeting then would be June, let me get my calendar out here, be June 8th. Do I have that correct?
Sounds right. Yep.
Okay, and we do have a public hearing at that one? Okay.
We do. Yep.
Okay. All right. Anything else anybody has for the good of the order? Okay, well, Cole, welcome. Well, this was a short one. Wait till we get some of our fun ones, huh?
And you'll get Nels really going.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, everybody. Well, with that, the meeting is adjourned. Great. Thanks, Mike.